He didn't know the man in the coffin. Not his face. Not his name. Not a single thing about his life. So why was Jay Lee standing at his funeral? And why did the letter in his hand have his own name written inside it? Not James Lawson's name. Not the name of the widow sobbing in the front row. Not the name of the lawyer who had just pressed the envelope into Jay's hands with shaking fingers. His name. Jay Lee. Printed with care, like whoever wrote it wanted to make sure he couldn't claim it was a mistake. He had walked into that church an hour ago as a stranger. He was still a stranger. He didn't belong in this grief, didn't belong between these weeping people, didn't belong anywhere near the silver-haired man lying motionless in that polished oak casket at the front of the room. But someone had gone to a great deal of trouble to make sure he was here. And somewhere in the back of Jay's mind, beneath the confusion and the cold unease, a question had started forming. Quiet at first. Then louder. The kind of question that, once it starts, does not stop until it gets an answer. Why me? It had started with a letter. Not the one in his hand now, a different one. The one that had arrived at his apartment 5 days ago, slipped through the mail slot on a Tuesday morning like it was ordinary. A cream-colored envelope with his name and address on the front, no return address on the back. Inside, a single index card with 6 handwritten words. You need to be at this funeral. Below the words, a date, a time, and an address. Nothing else. No explanation. No name. No reason. Jay had stood in his kitchen holding that card for a long time. His first instinct was to toss it. His second was to call someone. But who? The police? To report a mysterious funeral invitation? He had turned it over, held it to the light, looked for anything he'd missed. There was nothing. Just those 6 words and the date, the 14th of October, and an address he didn't recognize. He had told himself he wasn't going. He was a 32-year-old structural engineer with a full schedule and zero tolerance for things that didn't make rational sense. He had gone to bed that night certain he would forget about it by morning. He hadn't slept. By Thursday he was still thinking about it. By Sunday morning, the 14th, he was in his car. He still couldn't explain it, even to himself. Something about seeing his own name on that card had made it impossible to stay home. Some part of him had recognized the weight of it before his mind caught up. And so he had driven to Mount Olive Church on the 14th of October, arriving 15 minutes late, slipping into the last pew like a man who hoped no one would notice him. No one had noticed him. Except one person. The church was packed, every dark wooden pew taken. People in their Sunday black, tissues pressed to eyes, programs folded in laps. A pastor at the front spoke about James Lawson, civil engineer, youth basketball coach, 31-year husband, with the warm certainty of someone eulogizing a genuinely good man. Jay had sat in the back and studied the framed photograph near the coffin. Silver-haired. Broad-shouldered. Deep lines from decades of smiling. An honest face. A completely unfamiliar face. And the whole time, across the aisle, the widow had been watching him. Not glancing. Not looking away when their eyes met. Watching, with the fixed, deliberate gaze of someone who expected him to be there, and had been waiting to confirm it. Brenda Lawson sat in the front row in a long black coat, silver-streaked locks pinned under a dark hat, her composure extraordinary for a woman burying 31 years of marriage. She should have been looking at the casket. She should have been looking at the pastor, the flowers, the photographs of her husband's life arranged around the altar. She was looking at Jay. And her expression wasn't confusion. It wasn't the polite curiosity of someone noticing a stranger. It was recognition. The graveside service ended in light October rain. The crowd moved in the slow, reluctant way of mourners who don't quite know how to transition from grief back to ordinary life, forming clusters, embracing, murmuring. Children drifted toward the older graves where the grass was longer. Someone was already carrying casserole dishes toward the church hall. Jay stood at the edge of it all and calculated his exit. He had come. He had stood at the grave of a man he didn't know. Whatever compulsion had driven him here, he had honored it. He could leave now. He should leave now. He was a stranger at someone else's most painful day, and the polite thing, the rational thing, was to go quietly and let these people grieve in peace. He took 2 steps toward the parking lot. Mr. Lee? He stopped. A man stood beside him, medium height, compact, mid-50s, with warm eyes and close-cropped silver at his temples. He wore a well-fitted dark suit and held the service program loosely in one hand, the way a man holds something he's been gripping for hours. "My name is Gabriel Santiago," the man said. "I was one of James's closest friends. 30 years. He paused. "He told me you'd come. He said once you got the letter, you wouldn't be able to stay away." Jay stared at him. Something cold moved through his chest. "He told you about me?" "Yes." Gabriel's expression was careful and layered, the look of a man holding back a great deal more than he was yet saying. "There's a lawyer here. Oliver Green. He's been waiting for you since this morning." He gestured toward the church hall. "Before you leave, Mr. Lee." "Please." Jay almost said no. The word was right there, fully formed, ready. He was 2 steps from his car. He could be back on the highway in 5 minutes, could spend the drive back convincing himself that this had been a strange coincidence, a case of mistaken identity, a grieving old man who had confused him with someone else. But Gabriel Santiago was watching him with eyes that held no confusion at all. "How does he know my name?" Jay asked. Gabriel held his gaze. "That," he said quietly, "is exactly what Mr. Green is here to explain." Oliver Green was waiting in a small side room off the church hall. The kind of room that was normally used for Sunday school, crayon drawings still pinned to the corkboard, small plastic chairs stacked in the corner, a smell of old paper and chalk. He rose when Jay entered, shook his hand with both of his, and gestured to the chair across the table. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Lee." He sat down and opened a slim leather briefcase with the careful movements of a man who handles fragile things for a living. "I want you to understand that your being here today was something James planned for carefully. He thought about this for a long time. I don't know James Lawson," Jay said flatly. "I've never heard his name. I don't know why I received an invitation to his funeral, and I don't know what I'm doing in this room." He heard the edge in his own voice and didn't soften it. "So I need you to explain this. Clearly." Oliver Green looked at him steadily. "I know," he said. "James knew that too." He reached into the briefcase and placed a sealed envelope on the table between them. Cream-colored, heavy stock. On the front, in neat handwriting, the same handwriting from the index card, Jay realized with a start, were 2 words. "For Jay." Jay looked at it without touching it. "He wrote it himself," Oliver said. 6 weeks before he passed. He was very specific. It was to be given to you in person, on the day of the funeral, after you had stood at the grave. He paused. "He said the letter would mean something different if you received it here, in this context, than if it arrived in the mail." "That's a strange condition," Jay said. "James Lawson was a very intentional man." Jay picked up the envelope. His hands were steadier than he felt. He broke the seal. Unfolded the letter inside. 2 pages, neat handwriting, every word chosen with visible care. He read the first line. Then he read it again. The room seemed to tilt slightly on its axis. Because at the top of that letter, beneath the date, beneath the careful greeting, James Lawson had written a sentence that made the crayon drawings on the corkboard and the sound of people talking on the other side of the wall feel very far away. "I have been watching over you for 32 years, Jay. And there are things you deserve to know about who you are and where you came from." Jay set the letter down on the table. "What is this?" he said. Quiet. Careful. Oliver Green removed his glasses. "I think you should read the rest," he said. "All of it. Take whatever time you need." He read the letter twice. Then he sat with it on the table in front of him, and stared at the wall, and tried to organize his thoughts into something manageable. They refused. The letter was 4 pages. James Lawson had written it in sections, the careful structure of an engineer who knew how to build something that had to hold weight. He began with an apology. Long, direct, and painful. Then he explained. Jay's mother, Lee Soo-jin, a graduate student from Seoul, had come to this city in the early 90s on a research scholarship. She had met James Lawson at a community center where he volunteered. They had become friends first. Then something more. And James, already married to Brenda, had let it continue for 18 months. When Soo-jin discovered she was pregnant, she had not told him immediately. She was frightened and proud and very aware of what the truth would cost everyone it touched. She made plans to return to Korea. James found out through a mutual friend 3 months before Jay was born. He had gone to her. He had begged her to stay. She had refused, told him she would raise her child alone, that the kindest thing he could do was let her go. He had agreed. He had watched a woman carrying his child board a plane back to Seoul, and he had gone home to Brenda, and he had said nothing. Jay pushed back from the table abruptly. He needed air. He needed to not be sitting in a Sunday school room being told that his entire sense of his own history was wrong. He walked to the small window and looked out at the cemetery, the fresh dark earth of the grave still visible beyond the iron fence, rain beginning to spot the surface. This is a mistake, he thought. This has to be a mistake. A man at the end of his life, confused, attaching a story to the wrong name. It happened. People conflated things. Memories blurred. But the letter knew his mother's name. Her full name. Her birthday. The university she'd attended in Seoul. The name of her research department. The street she had lived on in this city during her scholarship. These were not guesses. No confused old man produced details like those. Jay turned back to the table. He picked up the letter. He forced himself to keep reading. In the third page, almost as an afterthought, the way the most important things sometimes surface when a person has finally committed to honesty, James had written one line about a scar. Jay had a scar on the inside of his left forearm. 2 inches thin, pale with age. He had always been told it was from a childhood fall. He had no strong memory of it. It had simply always been there, part of him, unremarkable. James had written, I know about the scar on your left arm. You were 4 years old. You fell against an iron chair leg at your grandmother's house in Busan. Your mother called me that night, the last time she ever did. She was frightened. But you barely cried. She said you were stubborn even then. She said it like she was proud. Jay looked down at his arm. His left hand moved involuntarily. Pulled the sleeve back. Looked at the scar he had looked at 10,000 times. Pale and thin and utterly ordinary. A mark he had never questioned. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the rain picked up. He found Gabriel Santiago in the church hall, sitting alone at a corner table. The reception had thinned. Most guests had eaten, embraced, and gone. A few remained, speaking in low, warm tones over the last of the coffee. Someone was starting to stack folding chairs. Jay sat down across from Gabriel and placed the letter flat on the table between them. He didn't raise his voice. He was very deliberate about that. How long have you known? He asked. Gabriel didn't look away. James told me 8 years ago, he said. He'd been carrying it alone for a long time. I was angry at first, not at you. At the situation. At the choice he'd made. He paused. But James was one of the most honest men I've ever known. And I think the dishonesty of that one decision ate at him every single day for 32 years. He should have reached out, Jay said. The words came out harder than he meant. He knew where I was. He had resources. If all of this is true, if any of this is true, he had 32 years to pick up a phone. He was afraid, Gabriel said simply. Of what? That you'd reject him. Gabriel leaned forward slightly. He said that you had every right to. He said the greatest kindness he could offer you was to let you have a life that wasn't complicated by him, and that the greatest cruelty was that by doing that, he robbed you of the choice. He looked at Jay steadily. He didn't think he deserved your forgiveness. He wasn't asking for it. But he thought, at the end, that you deserved the truth. Jay sat with that. Did Brenda know? He asked. He told her last year when his diagnosis came in. Gabriel's voice softened. And she, after everything, agreed to today. The invitation letter, the lawyer, this meeting. That was her decision as much as his. He let that land. She asked Oliver to send you the letter? She made sure you were invited. Jay looked across the hall. Brenda Lawson was near the window in her coat, saying goodbye to the last guests with quiet, composed grace. As if she sensed his gaze, she looked up. Their eyes met, the same direct, unhurried contact as at the grave. This time she didn't just stare. This time, she nodded toward an empty corner of the room. She was asking him to come. Jay pushed his chair back. Part of him, the part that had been rational and self-protective his entire life, said to leave. To take the letter, drive home, process this alone, and decide later whether it was real or not. Whether it mattered. Whether he wanted it to matter. He stood up. And he walked toward her. They stood near the window together, Brenda and Jay, the rain steady now against the glass, white lilies in a vase on the sill between them. She was a striking woman up close, strong-boned, unhurried, with eyes that had done a great deal of living and had not been made smaller by any of it. She studied his face the way she had studied it at the grave. Looking for something, or confirming something she had already found. You look like him, she said. Her voice was low and steady. Not obviously. Not if you're not looking for it. But there's something in the jaw. The forehead. She paused. I've looked at James Lawson's face for 31 years. I know it well enough to find it in a stranger. Jay didn't know what to say to that. I'm sorry, he said finally. For everything this has cost you. She tilted her head slightly, measuring the sincerity of it. Then she seemed satisfied. My grief with James is mine, she said. It doesn't belong to you. You didn't choose any of this. A pause. What I want you to understand is that what James felt for you was not nothing. He didn't leave you behind and forget. He left you alone because he thought that was protection. He was wrong. But the love was real. The letter mentions a scholarship, Jay said carefully. Yes. Her chin lifted slightly. He funded it anonymously, through a foundation, when you were in college. He also knew, through people he trusted, when your consultancy was starting out. He made a phone call. He made sure you were seen for your first real contract. She held his gaze. You did the work. Every bit of it. He only made sure the door was open. Jay felt the ground shift again. The contract that had launched his company. The one that had seemed almost too well-timed. He had spent years crediting his own preparation, the right recommendation, good fortune. Now he was being told that good fortune had a name, and the name was James Lawson. He was in my life, Jay said slowly, without me ever knowing he existed. Yes, Brenda said. That was the choice he made. And I think some part of him, the part that was too afraid to come forward, told himself it was generous, unobtrusive, that he was helping without demanding anything in return. She paused. I think another part of him knew it was also cowardice. He was honest enough to know the difference. She reached into her coat pocket and removed a small object, a folded piece of paper, old and soft at the creases. She set it on the sill between them. Jay unfolded it. It was a photograph, printed on ordinary paper, slightly blurry from being enlarged from a small original. A boy, maybe 12 years old, dark-haired and serious-faced, carrying a backpack that was slightly too large for his frame, standing on a school sports field. Jay looked at it for a long time. He had seen versions of this photograph before. In his mother's albums, the same day, the same field. From a different angle. Which meant there had been someone else there with a camera. Someone who had no reason to be there except the singular reason that he had been watching. He kept this for 20 years, Brenda said quietly. Jay set the photograph down. His throat was tight. He was not going to fall apart in a church hall in front of a widow he had met an hour ago. He locked it down, breathed slowly, and held himself together with both hands. "There's more," Gabriel said from behind him. Jay hadn't heard him approach. Gabriel set a shoebox on the windowsill, old and battered, a piece of masking tape across the lid. On the tape, one word in permanent marker. Jay. Brenda gave him privacy. She walked Gabriel to the far end of the hall, and Jay stood alone at the window with the shoebox in the rain and the photograph of a 12-year-old boy on a school field. He opened the box. It was full of paper. Photographs, printed from news websites and community event pages, spanning years. Jay at 25 at a local engineering award ceremony, slightly blurry from being enlarged. Jay at 28, photographed in the background of a community infrastructure article, almost incidental. Jay at 30, shaking hands with a city official at a ribbon-cutting his firm had worked on. James Lawson had been watching for decades. But it was the letters that stopped him completely. Dozens of them, folded and dated, spanning nearly 20 years. Unsent. Every single one. Jay picked one up, dated the year he turned 21, and read it standing up, unable to make himself sit. Dear Jay, you turned 21 today. I don't know exactly how I know that felt like a milestone to mark, but it did. I hope you celebrated with people who love you. I hope someone made you a cake, even if you think you're too grown for one. He set it down. Picked up another. Dear Jay, I heard your company landed its first real contract this year. I won't pretend I had no part in that. I hope you can forgive the interference. I only wanted to give you a fair start. Everything after that door opened you built yourself. I want you to know that clearly. And another. The handwriting in this one shakier, closer to the end. Dear Jay, I am going to tell Brenda the truth this week. I should have done it years ago. I am terrified not of her judgment, which I have earned, but of what comes after. Because after Brenda, the next step is you. And you don't know I exist. And I don't know, when you find out, whether you'll feel anything but anger. I think I'd understand the anger. I think I've earned that too. Jay set that one down carefully. He stood very still with his hands pressed flat on the windowsill and the rain coming down and the box of 2 decades open in front of him. He thought about his mother, Sujin, who had raised him alone in soul with quiet strength and very few words about the past. Who had deflected every question about his father with answers so gentle and so vague that he had eventually stopped asking. Who had moved them to the United States when Jay was 16 for a job at a research firm. A job. In this city? This specific city. He had never questioned it. Why would he? She had gotten an offer. They had moved. It was that simple. It had never been that simple. She had kept them close to a man she never spoke about, in a city she had once called home, close enough that a father who was too afraid to knock on a door could still be near. And James Lawson, guilty, faithful, terrified, had spent 20 years writing letters to a son he would never send them to, buying time he would eventually run out of. There was one more envelope at the bottom of the box. Smaller than the others. The handwriting shakier still. His name on the front. Brenda appeared quietly at his elbow. He wrote that one 2 weeks before he died, she said. He asked me to make sure you saw everything else first. He said the box would explain what the letter couldn't. She stepped back. Take your time. Jay read the final letter alone. It was a page and a half, the handwriting slowed by illness but each word deliberate, the writing of a man who knows he is running out of time and has chosen, at last, to spend what remains on the truth. Jay. If you're reading this, you came. And if you came, you've seen the box. I hope you're not too angry. I hope, though I have no right to hope for anything from you, that some part of what you found makes sense of something that never quite did. I am not going to ask you to forgive me. That would be unfair. Forgiveness is something a person arrives at on their own terms. Nobody has the right to request it on a deadline, least of all from the person they failed most. What I will do is tell you the truth I should have been brave enough to say in person. You are my son. I don't say that to claim anything. You owe me nothing, not a single thing. You are your mother's son first and completely. She raised you. She shaped you. She gave you a clean beginning when I gave you nothing but the complicated fact of existing. Everything you are, she built. But you are also mine, in the biological sense, and in the deeper sense that I have thought about you nearly every day for 32 years. I have marked your birthdays in my calendar. I have kept your photograph in my desk drawer. I have written you letters I never had the courage to send. There is no version of my life in which you are not present. I want you to know 3 things. First, your mother was extraordinary. What she chose to do, raise you alone, protect you from a complicated truth, give you a start that was clean and unburdened, that was an act of deep love. The silence was not cruelty. It was protection. Please don't be angry at her for it. Second, you built your life yourself. I made 1 phone call. I funded 1 scholarship. Everything else you earned. Your ability, your discipline, your reputation, those are yours completely. I was a nudge. You were the force. Third, I'm telling you this now, at the end of my life, not because I became brave. I didn't. I'm telling you because I could not die having never said your name out loud to you. Even in a letter. Even like this, where I can't see your face or know how you've taken it. I needed you to know that you were known. That someone on this earth counted your years, kept your photograph, loved you, quietly and imperfectly and from a distance that I created and then regretted, for your entire life. That's all. That's everything. If you leave this church today and never think about me again, I understand that. You have every right to that choice. But if there is any part of you, any small part, that wants to know more, Brenda will be there. She is a far better person than I deserved, and she agreed to this because she is built from a different kind of courage than I was. With all the love I have left, James. Jay stood at the window for a long time after he finished reading. The hall was almost empty now. The last guests were filing out, exchanging low farewells, pulling coats back on. The casserole dishes were gone. The folding tables were being stacked. Someone had already taken the flowers from the reception table, and the room felt larger for their absence. Jay thought about the index card that had arrived at his apartment 5 days ago. 6 words. You need to be at this funeral. He had stood in his kitchen and turned it over looking for more, some explanation, some context, something that would make the request make sense. There had been nothing. Just the date and the address and the impossible instruction. He understood now why there had been nothing else. Because no explanation would have been enough. Because James Lawson had known, even at the end, even from a hospital bed, that the only thing that would bring Jay here was the mystery itself. The unanswered question. The impossible weight of his own name in a stranger's handwriting. He had been counted on to come. He folded the letter. He placed it carefully in the shoebox with the others, with the unsent birthday letters and the blurry photographs and 20 years of love that had nowhere to go except a box in a desk drawer. He closed the lid. He pressed his hand flat against the masking tape, against the one word written there in permanent marker. His name. Brenda appeared in the doorway. She didn't come closer. She understood, somehow, exactly how much space he needed. That quality, Jay thought, was probably what 31 years with a complicated man had built in her. The ability to read the distance between what a person was feeling and what they were ready to say. The offer stands, she said. Whenever you're ready. There are more photographs. More things he kept. None of it is going anywhere. She held his gaze. You don't have to call us family. I'm not asking for that. But I won't pretend you're a stranger. You were never really a stranger, not to this house, not to him. A pause. Not to me. Jay looked at her, at this woman who had every right to have closed every door, who had instead opened them all. Who had stood at her husband's funeral in October rain, and watched for a face she had only seen in old photographs. Who had nodded when she found it. Thank you, he said. For today. For letting me be here. He held up the box slightly. For this. She nodded. Once, precise and warm. Then she stepped aside. He walked out through the hall and down the church steps into the rain, the shoebox under his arm. He stood on the steps for a moment and looked at the cemetery across the iron fence, at the dark-turned earth of the grave, the flowers beginning to bow under the weather, the whole quiet arrangement of a life concluded. A man he had never met. A man who had known him his entire life. He stepped off the church steps and walked to his car. He placed the shoebox carefully on the passenger seat. At a red light 3 blocks from the church, he reached over and touched the lid. The masking tape. The single word. His name, written by hands that had known his face from a photograph, his story from a distance, his existence from the very beginning. He had arrived at this church that morning as a stranger answering a question he didn't understand. He was driving home as someone who had been known, quietly, faithfully, imperfectly, for his entire life without ever knowing it. The light turned green. Jay Lee drove home through the rain. And somewhere in the space between who he had been that morning and who he was now, in the quiet, enormous distance between those two versions of himself, something that had always been slightly out of place clicked gently, irreversibly, into position. He had gone to a stranger's funeral. He had come home carrying his father's love.